we did was take pictures of ourselves. That's all we did. We're very conceited. We're very conceited on vacation. It's just like, oh, here we are at the ruins of the Mayans, this historical, glorious site. Better take a picture of ourselves 11 times in the same pose. That's what we did. Are we good now? Okay. We'll cut that out later. All right. Man, so anyway, so one day Stephanie brought me a pair of shoes home. This is one of those shoes. This is going to be an ad for Adidas, just so you're aware. Like this whole opening bit here. She brought me home these shoes, and here's the deal: that wasn't abnormal. Like it's not abnormal for my wife to bring me shoes because on the one hand, she's very nice, she's very kind, and she often. She knows I hate shopping. She knows that I hate the mall. That I hate, especially clothes shopping. Like I don't like shopping in general. But like if you're gonna rank the kinds of shopping, like clothes shopping is at the bottom of the list, and shoe shopping like I just don't like doing it. So she's kind. She very often will bring home clothing for hey, I got you this shirt, or hey, I got these pants, or hey, I got you these shoes. And it's not unusual that like these shoes showed up. What was unusual was like I liked them. Usually I don't like what Stephanie brings me home. And it's well, so here it is. So Stephanie's only kind of being nice when she brings me stuff home. Like she's being nice. I'm not going to take that away from her, but she also like Stephanie's got this itch she needs to scratch. Right? And that itch is she needs to buy stuff all the time. She has to buy stuff. If you look at her phone, she has this folder that says shopping on it. And there's like 47 apps in that folder because all she does, like, she's like shopping. And don't get me wrong, like it's always on sale. That's half the game. Stephanie has never bought anything that's not on sale, ever. Like we've been together for like 20 years. I've never seen this woman buy something at full price. It's a game to her. Like even if all she's saving is like 40 cents, she will not buy the thing that's not on sale. And so it's like this itch she's got to scratch. Like she's got to buy stuff and she's got to get stuff on sale. And so there's only so much she can buy for herself that's on sale. And so if it's like, oh, I got this shirt for like $4, and I'm like, yeah, but I don't like the shirt. And she's like, yeah, but it was $4. We've had that conversation, I don't even know how many times. And so she brings me these shoes. And so like when somebody says like, I got you a pair of shoes, that is like, I don't even pay attention anymore. Like I just, okay, like I don't know what she's gonna bring this time, but it's gonna be dumb. And it just is what it is. And so we have this beautiful marriage where she does this nice thing and then I complain about it. And that's where we are. But then one day she brought me home these shoes. They were new when she brought them. They're not new now. Here's what was significant about that day. These are the greatest shoes I've ever worn. They're they're incredible. I got to tell you all the reasons why. Okay, so first of all, you'll notice that there are no laces on these shoes. And look, I don't know, like maybe in like 1320 when we were first creating shoes. I don't know when shoes showed up in the world. Probably before 1320. But like, it's like back in the day when shoes were first made, like and you had to like a barbarian tie them. I guess that made sense. But in the year of our Lord 2022, I don't know why anybody should have to tie their shoes. Like the technology exists to just have slip-ons. Why not? Why not do that? Right? Like why ever tie a shoe? And if you can't just slip it on, Velcro. Okay? I get it. Like that's what like 5-year-olds wear. But whoever decided that only 5-year-olds could wear Velcro, I don't know. They're not in my life. I think we should have Velcro because I don't like tying my shoes. I just hate it. It's my least favorite thing in the world. I don't know why. Maybe I'll talk to a psychiatrist about it one day. So, great. So they do not, absolutely do not, I don't have to tie my shoes at all. The other thing that's really great about these is they're so light. Like these things are light as a feather. It's great. Like the only thing better than wearing shoes is not wearing shoes. Like we should all agree that wearing shoes is the worst thing. Like we only do because we have to, right? Like God doesn't give us shoes when we get out of the womb, right? The best thing we can do is to not wear them. So it's a pair of shoes that is light and airy and feathery. And guys, so you know how like there's that commercial for toilet paper with the bears, the cartoon bears, and it's real uncomfortable. You watch it and you're like, they really like that toilet paper. They really do. That's how I felt putting these shoes on. I was the bear being uncomfortable. Like it was like it's so nice. Like you barely feel that they're on. It's just great. I mean, but also they're supportive. Like you could stand all day in these things and like they don't like, it doesn't, you don't have back pain. Like you could run a marathon in these and it'd be fine. I guess I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to test that out, but I think you could. It's really great. So these shoes are amazing and I love them so very much. Yeah, they're just great. They're great. So after I actually sold, I think Cam has a pair of these. He's not in here. Cam ended up buying these shoes because of my recommendation. I was being an evangelist for these shoes. That's how much I like these shoes. And so I wore them every day. Like I didn't wear them to church, like on Sunday mornings, because it felt like I should wear different shoes. But other than like church days, like I wore these shoes every single day for every context in the world, and I just love them so much. So one day, I'm wearing these shoes, and Stephanie comes home. She said something cruel and hateful. And she said, Drew, we need to get you a new pair of shoes. And I said, no, we don't. That was the first conversation. We had several, but the first one was just no, and I just walked away in my amazing shoes. And she kept, Drew, we gotta do something. Like this is not okay. We gotta do something. I was like, no, these are perfect. I don't need new shoes. So finally one day we realized the problem here was that. Hello. That was what she was seeing was that big old hole there. It's on both shoes. So it turns out the reason that they're light is like this is just fabric, and a man's toe just whittles it down like MacGyver when he's tied up at a weird reference. I'm sorry for that. So I had these holes in the shoes. So I guess I needed new shoes, and so I got new shoes, and I got new shoes from Adidas that are not like they're like half as comfortable, guys. It's so annoying. I'm going to live and die and never wear a better pair of shoes than this. It's never going to happen because these are amazing, but also they have holes in them. I do wear them when Stephanie's not paying attention. I do that. If you guys need a wedding done, I'll definitely wear them to do your wedding. So there's that. Here's the point. The point is this. I am apparently a man who needs help, who needs a reminder as to when I need new shoes. Apparently, I am a person who will not get new shoes unless I am just essentially told that I need to. Like I like when Stephanie said like you need new shoes, I resisted. I said no, I like my old shoes and I still wear them. It's still like I am somebody who I need something to help me to get something new. Luckily I have a Stephanie who will help me whether I like it or not. And I was thinking about these shoes recently when I was reading the Bible. Because this is a Bible verse that, on the one hand, like we've read it a million times. Like you probably, like if you've been in the church, you've probably heard this verse. You've heard it quoted, particularly around this time of year. Like it's a favorite Easter passage. But I was thinking about the shoes with the Bible verse. Let's read it first. This is the book of Romans, chapter 6. This is what we read. It says, "For we died and were buried with Christ by baptism. And just as Christ was raised from the dead by the glorious power of the Father, now we also may live new lives." A little bit of context, background. Let's do the sermon thing, right? The Apostle Paul writes this letter to the ancient church at Rome. Church at Rome, Apostle Paul. Paul writes to them, and he's talking to them in chapter 5 about the old lives they lived before they knew Christ. And he talked about how, they weren't great. That they sinned, that they were defined by sin, that they hurt themselves, they hurt other people. It was this whole thing. And he talked about how every time they sinned, that God showed them grace. Every time they sinned, God showed them mercy. God did those things because that's what God is. That's who God is. That's how God operates. When we sin, God shows grace. When we make mistakes, God shows us mercy. When we hurt ourselves, hurt other people, God doesn't add to it by making things worse. This is part and parcel to who God is as an entity, as a being, as our creator. God does not make things worse when we make mistakes, right? So that's great. And so the idea could be then, well, it's actually kind of a praiseworthy thing, like a thing to worship God, and a thing that, hey, if every time we sin, God's just going to show us forgiveness, and every time we make mistakes, God's going to show us mercy. Why would we not just do what we want, let God show us mercy and grace, and then, if we make mistakes, then God looks good, everybody wins. And so Paul talks about at the beginning of chapter 6 that that's a really dumb thing. I mean, he doesn't say it in those words, but like for Paul, he basically does. He says, that's real dumb. Stop. I believe he says, may it never be, but that may it never be means that's real dumb. Stop when you read the Bible. And he's saying it's dumb. Like, why? Like, that's not the way this works. And that's where we get to this passage where he says, don't you realize that when you became Christians, when you were baptized, right? Like, baptism is this moment of line in the sand, this decision where you are following Christ. Don't you realize that a fundamental change happened? Just as Christ is buried and raised from the dead, in baptism, your old life is buried and a new life is raised again. It's this beautiful symmetry. That's why baptism is the way it is. That's the connection. It's a picture of burial and of rebirth. And so he says, don't you realize that when you became a Christian, when you understood who God was, when you understood who Jesus was, that you had a new life. You were given this new life. That's the commitment. You understand God now. But when you didn't understand God, God's mercy and grace, that was great and beautiful and wonderful. But now you understand who God is. You understand that sin is not something that's like this burden. Like, God's commands are not a burden. It's, sins are not these fun things you're trying to get away with. Sins are things that hurt you, hurt other people, and you should avoid them for those reasons. Now that you understand what all's going on, well, now, because of your baptism, because of your faith, now you have a new life to live. Real easy. Simple sermon. Simple passage. I was reading that, and I was thinking, man, why is Paul telling him this? He's writing to the church at Rome, which means they're all already Christians. Like, there's nothing here in these passages, in what I just talked about, there's nothing there that, like, for a mature, thinking Christian should be in any way, like, insightful or, oh, man, I hadn't thought of that. Like, I mean, like, theoretically, we should be past the idea of let's live the way we lived before we were Christians, right? Like, that should be in the rear view mirror if we're Christians. So why is Paul needing to write this to Christians at Rome? And the answer to that is, of course, my pair of shoes. It was really obvious. Guys, you saw that hole? How big that hole was in these shoes? It was real obvious that I needed new shoes. But see, I liked those shoes. And so I ignored the problems. And so I ignored the need that I had for the new shoes, and I needed somebody to come along and say, hey, idiot, maybe you shouldn't wear shoes with holes in them. And that's marriage. But see, theoretically, we should know that, like, we have this new life. We should know that the life we lived before, that the life we lived, the way the world lives maybe, is not the best life that we should live. Theoretically, we know that. But man, what if we like it? I would submit that before most of us were Christians, if there was a time, and depending on what sort of church you were raised in, maybe there was not a time before, but I would submit that most of us were happy people. And then we become Christians, and then we're happy people. I would argue that for most Christians, as we go from this, I don't know Christ, and then I know Christ, and now I know Christ, that we basically are the same level of content, discontented. We're going to be somewhere on the same continuum, because that's kind of how people are. We get used to a lot. You can get used to a whole lot in your life. And so I think the idea is that it can be really tempting to say, well, why do I need a new life? Why do I need to do things the way that Christ does them? Why do I need to see Jesus as the Word of God, who is the Son of God, who is the truth of God, who shows me everything the way to, like, why not just do whatever? Why not just sin? Why not just, add Jesus in, on top of everything? Like, why not do that? Why do I need new life? Why do I need new shoes? These are good. And I think the answer is, well, sometimes we need that reminder. Paul, in the rest of Romans chapter 6, does that. If you read the rest of Romans chapter 6, he goes kind of all in on, hey, your life before was not great. You may be thinking it was, but it wasn't. And so he goes into that. But here's why I'm bringing all this up. We are, I believe, 4 weeks from Easter. I don't know exactly how we count that. Either Easter is the 4th week, or I don't know. I think it's the 4th week. We're coming up on Easter, and Easter is the most, like, it's the, like, every, depending, no matter what denomination you are, no matter what kind of Christianity you are raised in or believe or are part of, Easter is it. Easter is the biggest thing. Like, that's our big thing. And Easter is all about the resurrection of Jesus, and on top of that, our new life that we live in light of the resurrection of Jesus. And it begs the question, why? Why do we need the new life? Why? Why not just forgive us and save us and be done with it? Why do we need a new life? What is so wrong with the old life that we have a need for the new life? And so the next 4 weeks, that's what we're going to talk about. It's a brand new series called The Need for New Life. We're going to talk about exactly why the resurrection is essential for our lives as Christians. Beyond just saving us, why a new understanding of God and faith and life and people is so necessary. What's so wrong with our life that we need a new one? We're going to talk about that for the next month. And this morning, as we begin, we need to tell a story that doesn't have a happy ending. But before we do that, we need to answer one other question. And that question is this: why did God choose a people to begin with? Why did God choose a people to begin with? As you probably know, the people of Israel were God's people. Holy nation, royal priesthood, people after his own of his own possession, however you word all that. God took a country, a nation, a family, and said, these are my people. And I don't know that we actually ever stopped to question why that's what God did. Well, that could be a whole sermon series on its own. I'm just going to give you the answer without being coy, right? Like, without moving, like, this is the answer. The answer is this: God had a people in order to bless all the people. The idea went like this, okay? Trying to communicate with everybody all at once, trying to deal with everybody all at once, trying to, it wasn't working. The first 12 chapters of the Bible tell us story after story after story of, however we read it, literally or figuratively, whatever, they tell us stories of how it's not working. It doesn't work to kind of deal with people as a whole. So what God ends up doing in early on in the book of Genesis, we read, he picks up Abraham. And he says, hey, there's going to be one guy. Nobody believes in me. Nobody follows me. We'll just get one guy. And from Abraham, we'll go from one guy. It'll be one family. And then that one family will be one nation. And this will be my nation. And Abraham's descendants will outnumber the stars. And it's going to be great. And that's what I'm going to do. But in that one situation, in that one very beginning of chapter 12 of Genesis, the very, very beginning, and all throughout, we are told in the Bible that the reason that God chose Abraham was so that Abraham and his descendants would be a blessing to the entire world. God blessed the people of Israel, and the people of Israel were in turn supposed to be a blessing to everyone. That was the way it was supposed to work. God blesses Israel, Israel blesses other people. God reaches out to Israel, Israel reaches out to other people. God accepts and embraces and loves Israel, Israel accepts and embraces and loves everybody else. This entire phrase of being a royal priesthood is meant to be a priest goes as it stands between God and people. That's what a priest does. The entire nation is supposed to be a priesthood between God and the people of this world. That was the point. That was the purpose of Israel. That's what they're here for. And now that we say that, we know that they failed. They didn't do it. Like, read the Bible. They didn't do it at all. They didn't come close to doing it. They did the opposite of that. They failed at their job miserably. Like, it was just not even close. And so as we continue to read in the stories of the Old Testament, you keep going, what you'll find is that there's prophets. And these prophets very often they'll stand for God, and they're, this the people of Israel are supposed to be, a priesthood for the world, but they're not. And so the prophets are sent to the priests, the nation, and they say, hey, you're not doing stuff right. There are all these prophets who come on and say, guys, you're failing at everything you're doing. And one of the conversations that happens is this repeated parable, this repeated illustration about who the people of Israel were and what they weren't doing. And that illustration goes like this. You are like a fig tree that does not bear fruit. Now, here's why that illustration is so important to them. Fig trees are everywhere in their world, and also fig trees have one job, and that's to make figs. A fig tree that doesn't make figs is firewood. There's no point in it. And so over and over and over, this is a powerful lesson. The prophets, Jeremiah said it, and Malachi said it, and Joel said it, and a guy, Hosea. There was 4 of them, and I thought I would forget one. But there's 4 different prophets. They all said, this is what Israel is. You guys are like a fig tree that does not produce figs. There's no point in you. You guys have failed at your job. You're not doing what you're supposed to do, and we are calling you to repent. But the people of Israel don't repent. At least not on a nationwide, long-term, large-scale situation. So, all of that leads us to one day Jesus is with his disciples. It's the last week of his ministry. He's he's a few days away from being arrested, a few days away from being, in the sham trial, a few days away from being executed, and a few days away from, raising from the dead, depending on how we want to use the term, a few days. And Jesus traveling with his disciples. And it's the morning. And look, I don't know. It's hard. The Bible doesn't really tell us exactly that Jesus is being prophetic exactly. The Bible just tells us he was hungry. He was just wanting some breakfast. It's pretty clear, though, that Jesus understands who the prophets are, and he understands the imagery with everything. And so it just so happens, maybe just so happens, or maybe he orchestrated it. I don't know how Jesus works exactly. He gets with his disciples, and he sees this fig tree, and the fig tree has no figs on it. And it's like a living embodiment of this old parable of all the prophets. And of course, his disciples, they would have all heard those prophetic things. I mean, they would have interpreted them a little differently than Jesus would have, obviously. But they certainly knew the phrase. And so, they get it. They see it. Their natural inclination would think, okay, I bet Jesus is gonna fix this tree. I bet he fixes this tree, because that's what Jesus does. Jesus fixes stuff. He's a fixer. Like Jesus, he's a healer. That's what he's done. But in fact, that's not what Jesus does at all. Instead, Jesus actually, in front of all his disciples, curses this fig tree and says, you'll never grow fruit again, and basically, curses it to wither and die. And his disciples would probably, they thought it was odd, because again, that's not how Jesus generally operates. And it's certainly, if this tree is a stand-in for Israel and it's any kind of prophetic anything, you would certainly think Jesus would heal this tree, because he's here to, heal Israel and all this stuff. There's all these things going through their heads. And I'm sure they would have asked him about it. The fact is, they had places to be. And the place to be that they were supposed to be, well, it kind of took front and center attention away from this whole tree situation. So Jesus curses the tree. The disciples are probably wondering what's going on, but where they're going is to the temple. And this is what we learn happens at the temple in the gospel according to Mark. We read this. When they arrived back in Jerusalem, Jesus entered the temple and began to drive out the people buying and selling animals for sacrifices. He knocked over the tables of the money changers and the chairs of those selling doves, and he stopped everyone from using the temple as a marketplace. He said to them, "The scriptures declare my temple will be called the house of prayer for all nations, but you have turned it into a den of thieves." One of Jesus' most famous stories. Also, maybe one of Jesus' most misunderstood stories. This is one of those stories that's becomes like a Rorschach test for people. Like, you kind of see what you want to see in this. I need you guys to understand. I've read long, in-depth, complicated breakdowns of this passage explaining why Jesus was nonviolent. Okay? I have also read the exact opposite, long breakdowns explaining why this proves that Jesus endorses violence. It's that kind of story in the Bible where people just see what they want to see. And it's great. But it's a famous story. You guys know Jesus cleanses the temple. And so you can imagine the fig tree, like they've forgotten the fig tree altogether. Because now Jesus is in the temple. He is going in, interrupting normal business, getting rid of, turning over tables and getting, opening, pens of animals and, sending people away. It's this whole thing. And so we kind of are left to ask, well, what is Jesus doing? Well, one of the things that there's a big misconception about this story and about the temple in general is the big misconception goes like this, that Jesus didn't like that the money changers were there in the first place. That's actually not true. In fact, when we think about it, the money changers were a necessary part of this whole situation. I mean, Jesus said this is supposed to be a house of prayer for the nations. The money changers were essential for that purpose. And here's why. At the center of worship in the temple was the sacrifice of animals. Okay? But according to the law, you could only sacrifice certain animals. You can't sacrifice every animal. You can't do that. You got to follow the law. You got to follow certain animals. So you can't just bring an animal from home. You can't just pick something up off the side of the road. And if you traveled at a great distance, like, you're one of the people that people of Israel are supposed to reach out to that are not, ethnic Hebrews, right? Like the people they're supposed to be here for. You certainly can't just bring an animal in, right? So you need animals on site, which means you need to be able to pay for those animals. Because I don't know if you guys know this about animals, but if you don't feed them, they die. I know. It's crazy. And if you don't pay somebody to clean up after them, well, they'll stink. I mean, they stink anyway, but they'll doubly stink if you don't clean up after them, right? If you have to have animals on site, that's a whole operation of feeding and caring for the animals, and that operation takes money, which means the animals have to cost a certain amount of money. But here's the thing that we never think about: in the Roman Empire, there is not just $1. There's not just one universal dollar. It's not the U.S. dollar, right? It's not the way that works. There's all sorts of currency from all over the world. And if the people of Israel are actually going to be a blessing to the world, and their temple is a place where people can come from all over the world, they need money changers who are going to, take money from all over the empire and put it into a currency that makes sense for the temple, so we can sell the animals, so that the animals can be sacrificed, so everybody can worship and everybody can be happy. The system itself was not bad, is the point. It wasn't bad. Just, how do I say this delicately? There's a lot of things that are a great idea, but then people try to implement them, and what was a good idea, you realize, is the worst idea ever, because people are the ones implementing them. And maybe in a world where people aren't implementing them, it's a great idea. But people get involved, and it's a whole thing. And that's what's going on in the temple, right? I mean, for one, the big problem, one of the big problems we don't often think about is if you went to the temple, the first thing you saw was not an altar, was not a priest, was not anything of worship. It was this giant zoo, this farm, this bazaar of animals. And so front and center was not a place of peace and reverence and worship, but it was a loud, noisy, smelly barnyard of everything, right? The priorities were completely misplaced. The temple, money changing, and animals took precedence over the worship itself. Because that's sort of how we do things as people. We as people love to participate in things right up to the moment that we can put ourselves at the center of it, and then, oh yeah, we'll do that. See, everybody wants to be a helper till they get to be in charge. Everybody wants to help out until they can get power. Well, then who cares about helping? And so this whole money-changing operation becomes the main thing. Instead of the thing to serve the temple, it becomes kind of the purpose of the temple because it was making money. It was making money. So now it's a business, and now it's making money, and now the church becomes about money. I'm sorry, my bad. The temple became about money. Freudian slip there. the temple becomes about money there, right? Like, it all becomes about that because that's just sort of naturally how it was. And now that it's all about money, well, now we're ready for the corruption and the bribes and the greased palms and everything else. And just Jesus coming along and says, you turn, this into a den of thieves and robbers. He's looking around and he can't find an honest guy in the bunch. And so this necessary thing that actually shows the Jews at least at some point on some level were trying, now became a religious system in which people put themselves at the center, and then they were corrupt and took from other people, where the powerful hurt the weak, and the last thing anybody cared about was God. That's why Jesus came in and cleaned house. Not because what was going on in the temple was wrong, but because the way it was going on was wrong. It's not that the animal sacrifice and the money changing was a problem. It's that it was the way it was being done. Stick a pin in that. We'll come back to that in about 3 minutes. So Jesus cleans out the temple, gets rid of all these people, and the Bible tells us that something beautiful happens. Like people who have not come, kids and people that have not been welcome before, they all come back. And for one day, it's the way it's supposed to be. And that would be a happy ending if that was the last day in the story. Remember, I told you guys this doesn't have a happy ending, because the next day happens. You know what happened to the temple? Yeah, we'll be right back. I mean, what's Jesus going to do? Show up and, kick out all the animals every day? Like, what's he going to do? Of course it went right back. And the thieves kept thieving, and the corruption kept going, and the attention was all on the people. Of course it was. So the disciples are walking, and it's the next day, and it's back to normal at the temple, and they look, and they end up, they see this tree. And they forgot about the tree. It's like, oh, we forgot. Like that. I mean, that temple stuff was so dramatic and so crazy. We completely forgot this tree thing. And so they're thinking in their heads, oh man, like there's definitely going to be surely it's going to be healed and restored, and we'll get figs off of it. There's a word one more time in Mark chapter 11. The next morning, as they passed by the fig tree, he had cursed. The disciples noticed it had withered from the roots up. Peter remembered what Jesus said to the tree on the previous day, and he exclaimed, "Look, Rabbi, the fig tree you cursed has withered and died." Then Jesus said to the disciples, "Have faith in God. I tell you the truth. You can say to this mountain, 'May you be lifted up and thrown into the sea.' May you be lifted up and thrown into the sea, and it will happen. But you must really believe it will happen and have no doubt in your heart. I tell you, you can pray for anything, and if you believe that you've received it, it will be yours. But when you are praying, first forgive anyone you are holding a grudge against, so that your Father in heaven will forgive your sins too." It's one of the most fascinating passages of good stuff. It's gold. It's gold. Okay, so here's why. First of all, the disciples think that the tree is going to be healed. Why wouldn't they? Okay, Jesus heals stuff. Jesus is not, and this is honestly the only miracle in the New Testament where Jesus is destructive. This is the only destructive miracle in the entirety of the New Testament. This is it. This is unique. This is the only time it happens. They have spent 3 years watching Jesus perform miracles, and everything works out. They've had 3 years of happy endings to the story. And this one doesn't have one. And Peter says, "Jesus, Rabbi, teacher, what is going on? The fig tree, you cursed it, but it's gone. Like, what's going on?" And Jesus, I mean, you know what's going on. I mean, you can see what's going on. This is an illustration. This is a parable. The Old Testament folks were like, "Hey, Israel is like a tree that doesn't have fruit on it, a fig tree." And Jesus sees a fig tree, and he does this. This is clearly Jesus' social commentary, so to speak, on what's going on in Israel, what's going on with the religious leaders, what's going on in the temple. We just talked about it, I mean, and it makes sense. The people that Jesus is having this social commentary about are about to kill him in a few days. It makes sense that Jesus would also say, "Hey, they're not doing the right thing." But see, there's this thing that Christians have done, And we're going to talk about this more in a few weeks. So if you think in a few weeks when we talk about this, you'd be like, oh, I remember what you're talking about. Just like, it seems like you just talked about this. But there's this thing that Christians have done where we've said, okay, religion doesn't go well. And it's true. The Jewish religion of those days, it didn't go well. And if you look around, like, it's not like I've never found a religion that does any better. Like, there's religions that seem pretty cool, but like, I was actually just reading while I was on vacation. There's this whole book about this guy who's this different religion, and like half his religion seemed cool, and half of it seemed absolutely nuts. Like, not good at all. And like, that's sort of what happens when I read about Christianity too. It's like, this all seems great, but like, I mean, not all. Like, that stuff doesn't seem great. And so that's, that's the way religion works. So there's this thing that we Christians very often do, which is we say like, well, religion is the problem. Which is, Christianity is not, it's not a religion, it's a relationship with God. I watched the Kurt Warner movie. That was a line in the movie. If you guys watch the Kurt Warner movie, it's really good. It's about football and Jesus and football. Do you guys like Kurt Warner? Come on. All right. Kurt Warner movie, like, he's like, hey, like, you see him into this religion stuff, and his wife, it's Anna Paquin, who's Rogue in X-Men, and probably other stuff, I don't know, but she's Rogue from X-Men back in, like, 2004, she's like, no, for me, it's about a relationship. And man, that sounds so good, because it makes it sound, like, really nice with Jesus. It makes it seem like, we're close with Jesus, and it's great, and it also, we get to say, well, I'm not religious. We're going to talk a lot more about this in a few weeks, but we'll just start here. That's not what happens. Jesus was exceedingly religious. The entirety of Jesus' ministry is centered around religious stuff. Jesus is constantly, like, Jesus is as devoutly religious a Jew as ever existed. Okay? Religion ain't the problem. Bad religion is the problem. I don't mean the band. Bad religion is the problem. It's not that religion is bad, it's that bad religion is bad. And we see what Jesus' sort of solution is in this response. So Peter is like, hey, you did this thing and the tree withered. And Jesus says, trust in God. And then he does two things, okay? Two things in that passage. The first thing he does is he quotes an ancient Hebrew folk saying, like a religious folk saying, that, you can pray, and if you believe, you can take a mountain and throw it in the sea. That's not Jesus. Jesus didn't make that up. That's not a phrase that Jesus comes up with on his own. That's actually a phrase that we find all over in the ancient world in Jewish writings. That is a Jewish sort of religious saying, okay? So Jesus is quoting common Jewish teaching, but then Jesus also, right after, quotes himself from the Sermon on the Mount. If you could pray, that God will forgive you and give you anything you ask, but you have to pray, you should forgive somebody first before God will, right? And like, I butchered that, but that's what the pastor said. What Jesus says is this: I want you to be religious the way that I am religious. That's what Jesus says. See, it's not that religion is bad. What was going on in the temple was not bad on its own. The way it was happening at the temple was bad. See? So we need a religion, says Jesus, that has the function without the sin. And how do we do that? Well, we trust God by trusting the way that Jesus teaches us God. By understanding God through the lens of Jesus, we're saved from this idea that we're the center of attention. We're saved from the idea that we're allowed to be corrupt and it's fine. That's what Paul talks about in Romans 6, right? Like, once you know Jesus, it makes no sense to live the way you used to live because you now understand Jesus. By understanding Jesus, you know the way you used to live. That's not the way you live now. When we filter our belief in God, we filter our religion through Jesus. We don't lose religion. We just put religion where it's supposed to be, as a tool to help us to be the people in this world who fulfill what it was that Abraham was told it was supposed to be, which is to be a blessing to other people. Because, by the way, that's the point of us too. Spoiler alert, the point of Israel simply became the point of the church. So said the earliest Christians. And by that I mean the Apostle Peter in the Bible. I could have just said the Bible. that job to be a blessing to everyone. That's us. How do we do that? Well, it's not by not being religious, but it's by being religious in the right way. It's by being religious by filtering our religion through who Jesus is, thereby putting everything in the right perspective, not being corrupt, and being people who actually care for others. There's not a happy ending to the religion that Jesus faced. Because at the end of the day, they needed a new one. There was a need for a new religion. There was a need for new life. There's no happy ending for the old one. The happy ending to the story is that in Christ, there is a new one. And for you and I in our lives, as we look at religion, we look at our faith and we just look at the concept of like, who are we as people and what do we look at in our own faith and in our own religion? The happy ending for us, the purpose, the guiding force is going to come through filtering everything through Christ. Being people who follow him and see religion the way he saw it, which is not as an unnecessary thing we discard, but is a central core component of our faith in God as it relates to God using us to bless the world. This morning, we're in our first week of our series called The Need for New Life. For the next month, we're going to talk about exactly why we need new life. Landing on Easter, when we'll talk about why we need the resurrection that day too. I just told you, forget you said that. It'll be a surprise. You guys want to be surprised on Easter. It's probably when I plan stuff. Anyway. This morning, as we talk about my shoes, and we talk about fig trees and cleaning out the temple, we learned this lesson, our first lesson from the Need for Living Life. First lesson is this: we need a better religion than one that is corrupt and focused on the wrong things. That is why we need Jesus. We need a better religion than one that is corrupt and focused on the wrong things. That is why we need Jesus. The musicians are going to come forward. We're going to sing a song. We have an invitation each and every week to take God up on this offer to embrace the understanding that we have through him. The Bible teaches that we're going to repent to be baptized, that thing Paul was talking about, which sounds like two things, but it is just one. It is us changing our minds, changing our hearts, and saying, I want to be aligned with Christ. You ever made that decision? We got a nice, warm baptistry. All sorts of people can do it. Let's talk. If you're an immersed believer in Christ, looking for a perfect church home, this place is not it, but we do serve a perfect God. We want to connect. We want to call. We want to cultivate. We want to meet new people. We want to share the gospel. We want to grow up while we do it. And we want to be people who are religious, but we are religious the way that Christ wants us to be religious, which is very different than the corrupt and focused on the wrong things religions that we see all over in our world and in the past. As we stand,